Hi, everyone, and welcome to Education 438, Teaching Reading and Writing in the Content Area. It is bright and early on Monday morning. I've got my coffee. I'm sleep deprived, but really happy to be back in town after a very successful, very informative conference. And I'm happy to be here filming our second to the last video of the semester, which is so wild to me. So, welcome to week 15. This is going to be a brief look at the week and then a slightly in-depth look on our unit plan stage 3 assignment, even though I really tried to break that down piece by piece in the assignment directions. But I'll still talk about it for those of you who want to continue listening. So, as always, we're going to start with a recap of last week and move on to topics, learning objectives, and essential questions for this week. We'll talk about readings and assignments. The big one, of course, is stage 3 of your unit plan. And then I'll talk about some reminders before really kind of digging into stage 3 and what it requires from you. So last week, we talked about characteristics of effective composition. So there's more long compositions instead of kind of the shorter paragraphs we've been talking about before that. We talked about or read about the transition outline, the multiple paragraph outline, and how to move students from one to the other. Types of argumentative writing and the skills students need to do all three effectively. Differentiated strategies for crafting sentences, outlines, and compositions. And then, of course, we had a great Zoom meeting where we learned about each other's inquiry projects. So I'm going to keep my takeaways really short this week so that this video doesn't get out of control lengthwise. But in the Writing Revolution, I really appreciated the author's point about the Common Core State standards. And so they mentioned that standards tell us where students need to end up, but they don't always explain to us how to get there. And so I appreciate a text like the Writing Revolution because it does give us those steps, those really explicit steps in getting students to where we need them to end up, right? I also liked their point that any writing tasks and assignments are always going to feel more relevant to students if they are rooted in the content being taught. And this is true with everything, right? Vocabulary instruction, writing instruction, whatever content you're teaching, it only makes sense for you to root activities within that. And then this was very tiny, but I've always struggled teaching introductions and conclusions. Maybe it's because those are the hardest for me to do as a writer. So as a writing instructor, those are hard for me to teach. And I really appreciated their suggestion for thinking about organizing an introduction and explicitly teaching how to write one. Their focus on general statements first, into specific, into thesis. So that was really helpful for me. All right, this week, really straightforward. So we're going to be returning to, if I can find it here, getting to the core of literacy. And the reason why I like this text is because it just has so many useful lesson plan models in it. And really, this week, you're going to be diving into some lesson ideas for argumentative writing and some for informative and explanatory writing. We're also going to be digging heavily into stage 3 unit design. I know some of you are already like knee deep in that process. And that process of the unit plan looks really deeply at creating lesson plans. And then I'm going to ask you to think about overall unit alignment and cohesion. This is something that when you turn in your final unit plan as your final exam in here, I'll be looking for. And so I want you to think about that this week. Learning objectives. You will explore an argumentative writing lesson from chapter 6 and think about how that lesson connects closely with writing standards and close reading. So there's several lessons within this chapter, and I want you to think about how to choose one that maybe most closely speaks to your content area. Then I just noticed I meant to put chapter 7 here, but I put chapter 6. I'm sorry, it's been a really long weekend. So you will also explore an informative explanatory writing lesson. And same thing, I want you to think about how that lesson connects to writing standards and to kind of close reading, just because we've been talking a lot about close reading this semester too. Then you will complete the final stage of your plan through crafting 5 to 7 lesson plans. And you will fine tune or think about fine tuning the overall cohesiveness of your unit plan through considering whether all the elements align. So that's going to become the big question that really next week in our final Zoom meeting, I'm going to ask you to think about, right? Is how can you make sure that all elements of your unit plan are aligning? All right, some essential questions for you. How can exploring writing-based lesson plans across content areas help inform the creation of our own? I think I've mentioned this before this semester, but I always felt and still feel stronger as a literature teacher than a writing teacher. So I have really appreciated getting to re-explore both the writing revolution and then the lesson plans, of course, embedded in here. In what ways do the argumentative, informative, and explanatory lesson plans in getting to the core of literacy serve as model texts, right? So as we're moving into creating our own lesson plans this week, I think these can serve as a model for that. How do we create lesson plans that align with larger unit objectives, performance tasks, and standards, right? So we're not just creating lesson plans for the fun of it. We're thinking about how those lesson plans fit in with the larger scope of our unit. And then, really, why is this cohesion so essential? How do we make sure every aspect of our unit plan aligns with all the others? So, those are your big questions for this week. In terms of reminders, obviously there's no required Zoom meeting this week. Generally, I would hold office hours, but I am traveling for the holidays. That being said, if you have questions or you want to set up a Zoom at some point, moving into when this is due on Sunday, please reach out and we can make that happen. And also, have a great Thanksgiving. All right, so some reminders. I know I stressed this a lot last week. Pause, let me get a drink of coffee. Mm. But please, 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 please don't leave stage 3 until Sunday. You will be so miserable. It is a lot of work. So the unit plan stage 3 is due November 30th, and it's due in two ways. It's due as an assignment, which you'll see on Canvas under this week's module, but I'm also going to ask you to upload it to your pod members. There's a discussion assignment for this too, so that they can give you some feedback. So you can have eyes on this besides just mine, because I really do try to be a careful grader, but there's always something that I might miss that someone else might catch. And I think the more feedback we can have, the better. Also, you all know that I'm just very, very committed to you having an audience for some of this work that's larger than just me. That's the class, right? We can all learn from each other's lessons, from each other's inquiry projects, etc. So I am real quick going to pull up this week. And before I go over actually stage 3, I just want to point out really quickly that your only assigned reading this week is those 2 chapters that I mentioned in getting to the core of literacy. And really, you're not even reading the whole thing. You're just going to preview the lesson and choose the one that relates best to your content area and spend some time with that. So I'm really trying to keep the reading very, very chill this week. Conversely, I don't know. I'm just kind of making up words at this point, you all. It's, like I said, very early. I guess more excitedly, you don't have any more reading in this class after this week. So that, I think, that is a milestone that we all have reached together. So you'll notice that there's no upcoming textbook readings for week 16. Okay, let's dig in. So I have tried so hard to make this as explicit as I can, and maybe it's like too much, but I would rather you all have too much information going into this assignment than not enough. So here's the context, okay? Stage 3 represents your evidence of a learning plan. So your ability to think about more kind of daily or micro lessons and how they fit within the scope of your overall unit plan. So you've identified your desired results, which was stage 1. You've talked about evidence for learning with those performance tasks in stage 2. And now you're going to develop the activities, right? That will support students in meeting your larger standards, objectives, goals. This is also an opportunity to synthesize everything you've learned over the course of the semester, right? All the concepts and ideas regarding literacy. You can pull those into these learning activities. So I've included a lot of information below on the construction of lessons and required elements at all as well. But also think about this as like just exercising your creative genius, right? One of the things that I love the most about being a teacher in any capacity is designing lessons and lesson activities. So I hope that you actually have fun doing this, because if you stay in the teaching field for a long time, you're going to be doing it for a very, very long time. So as you're starting pay attention to sequencing, okay? As always, you want to build rationally. You want to start with simpler concepts and skills and move to more complex ones. So think about your lessons as building on each other, right? We've been talking about scaffolding a lot this semester. So those lessons should scaffold, should build. You can chunk complex information into smaller, manageable pieces and move towards mastery of your subject. So you want obviously to organize your lessons around the core concepts and skills that are at the heart of your unit plan. So just think about that sequence, right? How are you organizing these lessons? That's one of the things I'm going to be looking for when I give you some feedback on stage 3 is, do those lessons build in complexity? Do they build on one another? The other thing that you want to think about as you're crafting these 5 to 7 lessons is to use a variety of activities. That is something that I have learned is vital over my teaching career is you want to vary up instruction and instructional activities as much as you can. So I have just listed just a variety of teaching methods here. I'm not going to read them all out to you. And there's some resources here as well. But the more you can incorporate multimodality, the more you can incorporate pair share, small group, whole group activities and discussion, the better, right? So just think about how your lessons can show a variety of different learning strategies and activities and not all the same things, right? So what I don't want to see is you creating 5 straight lessons of lecture or 5 straight lessons of small group work. It should be a combination of a variety of teaching methods. So there's a whole bunch there for you to explore. All right, here's your directions. Obviously, go ahead and keep using that same PDF that you have been using, that same template for your unit plan. Go ahead and remove the leave blank wording. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you're doing 5 to 7 lessons. You can do the minimum of 5 if that makes sense. If you are someone who is really like utilizing this unit plan as a means of actually attempting what this might look like as a teacher, if you feel like you need more than 5, great, do 7, okay? So here is what I want you to think about. Your lessons, okay, should focus entirely on your unit topic and should support your students in achieving your results, okay? Your enduring understandings, your essential questions, right? Your standards, your vocab, your knowledge and skill objectives, all of this should align. And even though I'm going to look very carefully at your lesson plans almost in and of themselves for this first round of feedback, for your whole unit plan, I am going to be looking at that cohesion. So do it now, right? Once again, clear logical sequencing, a variety of activities. Show me some evidence that you are thinking about the strategies and techniques and activities that we've learned throughout this class together. And obviously, there should be some connection between your lesson plans and your performance tasks, right? In what ways will your lessons prepare students for one or both of them? So I have this next section broken down into general requirements and specific lesson criteria, okay? So for each lesson, what you need is here, the title, the objective, a basic step-by-step guide, a quick explanation of how it's multimodal, or addresses some of the understanding by design principles that we've talked about earlier in the year. Will you need materials? Is this an individual, pair, small group, whole group lesson? Are there questions that might be asked? And is there a product involved? So for each lesson, you do need to include that information. And then here are some kind of individual lesson requirements. Obviously, your first lesson needs to start off with a hook, right? Something that introduces the lesson in a quick, interesting way. I have some ideas here. There also needs to be 1 vocabulary lesson as part of your compendium of 5 to 7. I would utilize one of the activities you identified in your 4th pod post. You've already done the work. You might as well include it. At least 1 lesson has to utilize a partner or small group discussion that involves one of the activities that we talked about in building academic language. Obviously, one of your lessons should use one of the texts that you identified as a unit text. And then, of course, you want some text-dependent questions there that vary in levels of complexity. 1 writing activity that addresses one of your writing standards. 1 lesson should integrate the use of technology. Small group activity in at least 1 lesson. A lesson incorporates a multimodal activity, hopefully one that involves multiple modes or modalities. A lesson that provides visuals. And then the final lesson should incorporate some kind of end of the unit assessment, larger project. Maybe it's something for one of your performance tasks, etc. So if you're creating 5 lessons, obviously these requirements can happen, like multiple requirements can happen in one lesson. So you might have a lesson that is a vocabulary lesson that also is multimodal. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. And then 12 is important. After you're done creating your lessons, you can go back up to the section in stage 2 of your unit plan entitled Formative Assessment. We had left that blank. Include a brief description of a way you plan to assess student learning in one of your lessons. Doesn't need to be long, just include a very brief rubric or list of criteria you will use to evaluate the assessment. I would say you already have done this for your performance tasks, so I want this to be connected to one of your lessons. Okay? Other than your reflection, you'll be done. So that was kind of a lot. Like I said, I really tried to kind of just break this down as much as I can. And I know that even still, there might be some questions that you still have. So please reach out to me, email me, don't be stressed, and I will help as best I can. Okay. So I will say just keep reading over these instructions carefully, use this as a checklist, and don't wait till the last minute. You'll notice here that there is also a space where you can upload your unit plan as it stands after you finish stage 3 to your pod post. Okay. You'll have a week to read over your pod members' unit plans and give them some concrete feedback. So all you need to worry about this week is just uploading it to the pod post discussion. You don't need to worry about giving feedback until I think it's like December 7th. All right, so you've got some time. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. That was a lot. It's a lot early in the morning. I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, but as always, you all, I appreciate you. I'm thankful for our time together this semester and happy lesson planning. Reach out if you need help and happy Thanksgiving.